Welcome to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. I believe every man has the potential to push past his limits and strive for something greater. Whether you're a former athlete who is looking for what's next, a professional pushing through the daily grind, or someone simply ready to break through life's toughest challenges, if you're ready to step into the pursuit of something more, your pursuit begins now. All right, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. Today we have Chris Huerta joining us. And Chris, hey, before we dive into your story, a few fun facts. Number one, what is your favorite all-time sports team? Could be basketball, football, whatever sport that might be.
Man, that's a tough one. I don't know if I have an all-time sports favorite. I think it's most recently, it's been the Minnesota Vikings. I'm partial to football, NFL specifically. I used to be a Packer fan growing up in Wisconsin, but then I realized that I was actually a Brett Favre fan. And so when Favre left the Packers, I left with him. And then eventually when he left the Vikings and retired, I stayed a Vikings fan. So I'd say that's, at this time, it's my favorite team.
There we go. Today you don't hear that too often, from a Packer fan to a Viking fan.
Yeah.
How about your favorite all-time player?
Man, interesting enough, I'm not necessarily a huge basketball fan or watcher, but I would say it used to be Brett Favre for sure.
In football, yeah.
But I think just overall athletes, Michael Jordan just was amazing. And like I said, I never really played basketball, only watched it during the playoffs and finals. But I would watch him in basically anything he did because he represented a type of talent and player and just competitor that, I don't know, it comes around once in a generation.
MJ, I agree. You can have highlight reel after highlight reel of Michael Jordan. And then the last one, like a biggest highlight of yours of playing sports in high school or like in college?
I would say my high school experience, maybe even middle school. I'll give you maybe a couple. When I was in Little League, I was on a traveling baseball team, and we were like the Bad News Bears. We were sponsored by a local company, and we had these kind of ragtag uniforms. And there was a tournament that was held every single year in La Crosse, Wisconsin, called the Stars of Tomorrow. I have no idea if it's still there, but we went there, and really against all odds, this ragtag team, we ended up losing in the championship game, but it was definitely one of the most enjoyable times I've had in sports, and everything came down to the wire. We ended up losing to a team from Westerville, Ohio. They looked like they were grown men with two sets of uniforms, but we only lost 5-3. And all of our runs were off home runs because this pitcher, it's like he was Nolan Ryan. He brought the heat. But that was a great time, great experience. Tough to lose, but certainly love that. And then I would say really all of high school football I enjoy. There's something about Friday Night Lights.
It is.
We always played on Friday night, Wisconsin, just the weather. It was a beautiful time in my life for sure.
That leads right into, Chris, about sharing with the listeners about you growing up in, I believe it was Waukesha, right? Wisconsin, and some of the highlights and challenges along your journey in Waukesha.
Sure. I wasn't born in Waukesha. I was born in Milwaukee, but lived there for the first 5 years of my life. I have two older brothers. And my dad, who's originally from Mexico, came to the United States in the 50s. He was a hard worker. And at some point, he wanted to move us out to the suburbs because I think he thought that all the influences of the city, the bad influences, would just magically disappear. Wanted a better life for his family, moved us out to Waukesha. So I moved out to Waukesha when I was about 6 years old. The transition there was a little challenging. As a child, like so many of us, experienced some early childhood trauma that certainly shaped and impacted my life. Some of those early memories, not all bad, but definitely running around the neighborhood unsupervised. I think that was just the way things were done
Mhm.
back in the day, in the 70s in particular, probably even before that. But yeah, I think the challenge was not everyone in the neighborhood, in the community was a good influence. And you had people that were not going to be for me. And so I definitely experienced some challenges that impacted me going forward, really got into some risky behaviors, things of that nature as a result. Really started off with some rough habits. Really, it was early on, probably 12 years old, where I began to get into alcohol, drugs, things of that nature to medicate, cope with the various emotional, mental challenges that I was going through at the time. Certainly wasn't all bad. I think growing up in the 70s and then the 80s, just a lot of freedom for a young boy. And there was a lot of great times as well, playing baseball with the my friends and just felt on top of the world at times. But certainly there were some challenges that I had to wrestle with for sure.
And then as you proceeded into kind of high school, I know you're involved in a lot of sports.
Yeah, that was the interesting part. It was a duality, if you will. I was dabbling in various substances. I was having these challenges with bad behaviors. But at the same time, I grew up and my brothers were athletes. We loved sports. We were always playing something outside. And so it was just natural for me to get involved in sports. And that really provided like a tension and almost held back for a time my pursuit into various addictive behaviors and so forth. Provided a great outlet. So, like I mentioned earlier, I probably started baseball the earliest and maybe a little soccer. I think everyone plays soccer when they're young, maybe. I
Mhm.
don't know, just to get the energy out. Eventually, I had to make some decisions about what I was going to do. I had been wrestling since I was a first grader. There's wrestling, there's baseball, there's soccer. And finally, I just landed on football, which for us started in the seventh grade. And just really figuring out what it is I wanted to do, what position I wanted to play. I didn't really know. I think every kid at some point, maybe not every kid, but there's this desire to be a quarterback, right? Let me see if I can be the quarterback. I figured I probably wasn't quarterback material, at least early on. And they tend to make those decisions pretty early on and get young kids on a track.
Mm.
And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to be a quarterback. What am I going to do? So I went over to the defense and I played defensive back. I played safety. I played some defensive end. I just tried everything until one day in the ninth grade, something just clicked. And I was like, I think I'm a receiver. I think I'm meant to catch the ball. And so then I switched back over to receiver. And really, that was my position. I did play some defense throughout high school. I would play both ways as needed. Safety was an easy position because it was basically like a defensive receiver. I'm just going in on most likely passing downs. But for the most part, that was really my forte was catching the ball.
And tell us about some of the getting involved in alcohol, drugs, how that kind of affect your schoolwork, like your grades, how that
Yeah,
affected. I know eventually there's some things that happened in through high school that you had to in and out of some treatment. So can you just share that
sure.
with the listeners?
Yeah. The challenge was as I started to use more and got older and older, it became more and more difficult to maintain both lifestyles. I had friend groups who were using and friend groups who were athletes. And it was just this just interesting place where I don't think I really understood who I was. I wanted to be in both worlds at the same time. But one thing that alcohol and particularly drugs, marijuana, things of that nature, it begins to take over. You can't really control that stuff, especially if you have more of an addictive nature personality, which I did. And so eventually I was a really good student, and eventually that suffered. And it was a turning point in the 10th grade where my grades went from like a 3.5 to a 1.4 in one semester. And that was difficult because I think people were like my teachers, my parents, they're like, what is going on? And I knew what was going on, but I didn't really know how to articulate that. And I had a situation in 10th grade where I broke my collarbone, and I was having a really good season. It was just a breakout season for me. But I broke my collarbone, missed the rest of the season, and just fell into a depression. And I think that's really where my addiction began to really take root. Because football, sports, that's really all I had at the time. And then I didn't have that. So what is my identity? Who am I? And those types of things started to sink in. And that became evident to my parents, teachers, coaches, and they wanted to get me help. And that's really when I started to get into a treatment type facility, mostly outpatient until my senior year.
So tell us real quickly, maybe sum it up in about a minute, your final year at high school. So you're going through some treatment throughout high school, broke a collarbone. I know you had a new coach, but GPA went down a little bit. But just give us a kind of an idea in a minute about that
Yeah,
last year in high school.
sure. Yeah, summer before the last my senior year, I had worked very hard physically with our quarterback at the time. You know, there's a lot of hopes and dreams for this particular team, and just I stayed away from alcohol, from drugs, just really committed myself to preparing for the season. And it was probably the second game of the season, maybe the first conference game. And in the beginning of the game, our quarterback took off running, and he broke his collarbone when he got hit. He ended up getting a broken collarbone, and really that was the end of his season. And maybe it was another game into the season, but it really went downhill from there for me. I just gave up all hope because I recognized that the backup quarterback was not going to be able to do the job and really be the same as all that work, all that effort I put in. It just seemed to be for what? So I really struggled throughout that year to stay sober and eventually succumb to getting back into the throes of my addiction. And my mom, she realized what was going on. She talked to our coach, and he's, Chris, I care more about you as a human being, as a person, than us winning. And you really need to get help. And from that point, again, missed last 3 games of the season, spent the next 30, 60 days in an inpatient treatment facility. And that really was the low point of my senior year. I really struggled to graduate that year. I felt like I was just trying to figure out who I was again until really I was given another opportunity to play some college football.
Yeah, tell the listeners about that, about you attending, I think it was Carthage College, right? In
Yep.
Wisconsin for football, and just some highlights along there. I'd be you attending that school. That's amazing right there for what you went through
Yeah,
high school, but especially your senior year, and
right.
maybe some of the challenges that first year.
Like, just despite the missing the last 3 games, I still was voted honorable mention in the conference. I still led the team in receptions, yards. So I think there was some hope out there for some teams, particularly at the Division 3 level, and they were willing to take a chance with me, in particular Carthage. That coach had come over from Menominee Falls. He was a coach over there, had a lot of success. He knew my coach, and I think they really wanted to give me another shot, another opportunity. And really, I did quite well from a football standpoint. I was able to play on the varsity as a freshman, not initially, but eventually worked my way into into the starting lineup. It had some success, probably not as much as I wanted to, but I continued to struggle with drinking and getting high. a college campus is a very difficult place
Hmm.
for someone who is struggling with substance. And so that really was the theme. Again, it was almost a mirror of what took place my senior year.
Yeah, if you want to on a college campus, I remember when I was in college, it's easy to find the drugs and
Yeah,
alcohol. It's not a hard thing to find
no,
on a college campus.
for sure.
Share with the
Um,
listeners. So I know you spent 1 year at Carthage College, but share with the listeners your mom attending this, I believe it was this Alliance Bible Church, I think it was. And then
yeah,
at age 19, you talk about kind of meeting the Lord and getting involved in the Teen Challenge. So share with us about that.
yes. By then, I had left Carthage, spent some time living in Ohio. Really, I think hit massive bottom. Moved back to Wisconsin. Was really in a bad place. And I don't know what compelled me, but where I was living, I just knelt down next to the bed and just said, God, if you're real, I need you to show me now,
Mhm.
because I felt a sense of desperation that potentially I was willing to take my life, or most likely continue down a path of drug use that would have either led to my death or to incarceration. And I really felt God showed up and met me in that place. And I just felt an urge to call my mom, and I hadn't talked to them probably in a few months. And she had told me she had been praying with her church, and that they were talking about a program called Teen Challenge, and that's something I should consider. I think initially I was like, yeah, not another drug treatment program. I've been
Mhm.
there, done that. I don't think I really understood that this was a faith-based drug treatment program, because I wasn't a Christian. I didn't really understand the whole Jesus God thing. And then when they told me it was 13 months, I was like, no way. I'm not going to spend 13 months of my life. And knowing that, hey, I actually might be dead in 13 months. 13 months is nothing. But eventually, yeah, I listened to God, ultimately to his call, and was able to enter Milwaukee Teen Challenge in 1989.
I think about you just sharing that. And now with you having eventually meeting your wife, and we'll get into that, and having three grown up ladies now, your three
Right,
daughters, and amen, the Teen Challenge, the impact it
right.
had on you. And share with us now that you would move to Southeast Missouri, and you're
Yeah.
involved in Teen Challenge there. And I think of where eventually you met your wife, and then
Hmm.
any kind of challenges and highlights along the way.
Certainly, getting through the first 3 months in Milwaukee was tough, but it was really good. Well, I really didn't have a choice, but a choice was given to my roommate. Hey, do you want to go to California or Missouri for the next phase of the program? Of course, he chose California. I was very upset and frustrated by that, because my path was Missouri, in the middle of nowhere. That was probably the biggest challenge. And then when I got there, this place was in the middle of nowhere, complete wilderness. I was just like, where am I at with 120 guys in very interesting accommodations? The food was just terrible. I think it's improved today, but back then it was really bad. We didn't have any meat really the entire time I was there. I think one time the closest we got to meat was liver, and then maybe a meat sandwich I had when I worked at on a farm one day. Teen Challenge really taught me how to work, and as painful as it was, an incredible shaping experience. And it really prepared me for the next part of my life, which is after graduating Teen Challenge. I went to work for a church in the community, busing in hundreds of kids from the community. It was a program called Super Saturday. It was modeled after a program in New York City, so much smaller scale. But yeah, I would volunteer at a group home for boys, play basketball with the boys. And that's essentially where my wife and I met.
Just tell us, I can, real briefly, because this could be a whole other topic about
Right.
the impact. You already shared a little bit about the impact Teen Challenge. How are you able to get through that program, Teen Challenge, for 13 months? Just share with the listeners how that was, maybe the struggles. How are you able to get through it in that period of time? That's a long period. Somebody go away for 13 months to be involved
Right.
in a program. Just share, if you can share real briefly about that experience.
Certainly, that's the number one thing that you feel there is the presence of God. You know that He's working in all of these guys from all these various backgrounds, coming out of prison, every different age, every different background. I think the community with each other, helping each other through the difficult times, that was incredibly encouraging. I think, really, it's like you're going to war with a band of brothers, and that really helped each and every one of us get through those times.
Yeah, that's a good lesson right there about, we always talk about having a community of support. And there you are,
Right.
you're all working for the same purpose.
For sure.
I want to get clean and I want to get through this program and
Right.
probably not just get through it. You want to, you're surviving through it, but you want to get through it. And on the other end, you want to be,
Right.
I don't want to do this again.
Survive.
That's right. So eventually I know you moved to the Twin Cities. Share with us about that, moving to the Twin Cities with the listeners, and then just some of the success and challenges along the way, being in the Twin Cities.
Yeah, I felt the Lord calling me to Bible college at North Central, and my brother lived up here at the time. And so my brother and sister-in-law, they took me in. And so I was working at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and I was also going to school at North Central. And it really was a great time in my life. I really think the only challenge was being apart from my now wife and maintaining a long distance relationship through letters, through cassette tapes that we'd send over through the mail. Some of
Cassette
them would,
tapes.
yeah, some of them wouldn't survive. It was a great time, but a very pivotal point in my life moving up there initially.
And then eventually she would move up to,
Yeah, eventually got to the point where I had enough courage to go down to Missouri and ask her father for her hand in marriage, but it was a process. She eventually did move up and move in with a lady from our church who was single, perfect situation. So they were great roommates for a period of time. And then we eventually got married in February of 93.
nice, February 93.
Yeah.
Remember that, listeners. Okay, their anniversary is in February. What date? February
28th,
I didn't want to
28th.
put you on the spot, but February 28th. All right. Now share with the listeners some of the, because I know your three daughters, some of the success and challenges like
Right.
raising three girls. Because I think you grew up with brothers,
Yeah,
right?
we
When
had
you're
all
raising
boys.
girls.
So I didn't know what this girl thing was all about. I think most guys want a son, carry on the name, do the guy things, the son things with. And as each daughter came about, I realized that's probably not going to happen unless we maybe keep trying eventually. But that's probably not something that was going to be in the cards for us. And we were okay with it. But the beautiful thing is I know that God orchestrated and designed me to be a father of girls. And what he did in me, softening my heart, really giving me just three amazing girls with such personalities, just so interesting, each one of them. I learned how to do their hair, just all the different things that a father would do with a daughter. It was just an amazing time. And of course, my wife was there to coach me along the way and help me understand what that really should look like.
Share with the listeners too about your oldest daughter that went through some leukemia
Right.
treatments, and just share with us. That had to be a really struggle for your family, you and your wife
Yeah.
and all of you.
Yeah, it certainly was. In 2002, is actually April 1st. Our oldest daughter, she had been sick. We thought it was the flu or something, but we brought her into the doctor, and he basically said to us, she either has mono or leukemia, and I don't think it's mono. And that night, he said, I need you to go down to Children's Hospital. I'll meet you there. And it was that evening that we found out she had leukemia, specifically ALL. Her white blood cell count was 200,000, and a normal count is below 10,000, probably several thousand. It was from that point on, it was really the treatment to get that under control as quickly as possible.
And then I think she went into remission, right?
Yeah, she went into remission, 3 years treatment. We took out her ports that was in her body for receiving medication. By May of 2005, we had a big celebration, invited a bunch of people, declared she was cancer free, and then it wasn't long after that we realized that it had come back and she relapsed. And we went back into the hospital, and they were pretty frank with us. They said that we think at this point, because she didn't stay in remission, even with all this treatment, she probably has about a 30% chance of survival, but we need to find a transplant match. But we couldn't find a bone marrow transplant match. And so she underwent a procedure called a cord blood transplant. When the umbilical cord is cut, you can do this, but they'll do it for you. With or without your permission, they save the blood from the umbilical cord and they store that in a freezer because of the stem cells in that blood. And she had what's called a cord blood transplant from basically what amounted to two different donors. And they basically brought her to the brink of death and then brought her back to life. While she was at the hospital, there's several other patients there who had passed away. So it was a very challenging time.
And for your older daughter, I had her in class.
Right.
And I know now she's a miracle. She has a couple of kids, right?
Yeah, she has 2 kids, 2 daughters. They're my oldest grandkids. They told her she couldn't have kids. So the fact that she got pregnant really a week after she was married was unbelievable. They didn't even believe her until they had her checked out. And so they are truly miracles.
So, Chris, now why don't you share with us some of the best advice that's ever been given to you? Why do you feel is the best advice and who gave it to you?
There's probably 3 things. One of them is really live one day at a time. This is something I learned early on, but it's also a biblical principle. And obviously, I don't know, for anyone who's heard the serenity prayer, living one day at a time is a big part of that process. It's also what Jesus talks about in Matthew 6:34. So really understanding that we just need to focus on today. Take no thought for tomorrow. That today is really all we can handle, and not to be worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. Just focus on today. Sometimes it's 1 minute, 1 hour at a time, but really not getting too far ahead of myself. I love the author A.W. Tozer. He said in one of his books, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And I really try to remember that when things get out of whack and I start to doubt myself and maybe think of my own circumstance or my past or the future. And then I start to really focus on who God is, because that then can inform who I am. And that's really where my identity rests. And then really, I have a mentor, a friend. His name is Kirk. He says a lot. He said a lot to me. Hey, it may not be your fault, but it is your problem. And I know it's not a new saying. I don't know who came up with that, but he's the one who spoke it to me. And it's really this idea that, especially things that have happened in my childhood, like many individuals where they go through stuff, it may not have been my fault, but it certainly is my problem to deal with. And it's my responsibility to get the necessary healing and ultimately help others once I've been healed.
At times, you got to work on yourself before you can help others. I love that. So when have you had the most personal or professional growth in your life, and what caused that growth?
Both professionally and personal, it has been when I've had great moments of pain and difficulty. I don't think I've had any growth in my life without some degree of difficulty. Some has been really painful, Obviously, some near-death experiences that certainly is going to change anyone, and it certainly changed me. Less serious situations. I believe God uses difficulty, pain, suffering to help shape and mold our character. And at each point in time, whether it be in my career journey or in my personal journey, it's really taken some sort of difficult time to help me essentially turn back to the Lord and look to Him for answers, for help, for support. Certainly have learned how to walk humbly with others, particularly my wife, my kids. Pride has shown to be a very significant hindrance in my life. And I think most people, most men would probably agree that pride cometh before a fall. So really, it's been in those difficult moments where the growth has taken place.
Just going forward, wrapping this podcast up, who are some kind of influential people, like in your past or present time, that have made a huge impact on you?
Yeah, my high school football coach, he was probably one of the first. He just was an amazing individual coach, really cared about us as individuals, and certainly about me and my struggle, my journey. I mentioned Kirk. He's been a significant mentor for me, just as a man going through just regular, my purity journey, just everything that a Christian, godly man wants to strive towards. He's been a great influence there. My parents and my brothers, my oldest brother in particular, has been almost like a father figure. But really, my whole family has had an influence. For sure, my wife and my kids. My wife is incredibly strong, amazing. She's got her own testimony, which is phenomenal. And then just seeing my kids as adult children with their own kids has been very inspirational to me. And certainly there's countless leaders and brothers along the way that I can't possibly list in this short time.
Chris, wrapping this up, what are a few final thoughts you want to leave with men as they continue on their journey, personally, professionally, or maybe a combination of both?
Yeah, so certainly John 15:5, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. And really, that if we can't abide in Christ, nothing else is going to matter. I mentioned walking humbly with others, with your wife, if you're married. Learn to prioritize everything in life. We can't say yes to everything. We have to have priorities. Really, with God and your family, decide what's most important. If possible, show up for the stuff that matters to people you love or that you want to show that they're important. Again, it's really about prioritization. And then really do not live in fear of man, or at least fight the urge to fear man, knowing that God is sovereign and that we work unto him and not another human being. I think those are the things that I would most like to share as my final thoughts here.
All right, that's a wrap with Chris Huerta, and I want to thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast.
Thank you, Roger.
God bless, brother.
God bless.
Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at moppincoaching.com.